Ladies and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. It is show number 47 of the MMA podcast that brings you fighting talk with a distinctly British flavour. Simon Head and Chamatkar Sandhu back with you again to bring you what should be a pretty packed show. And as you can probably hear in the background, Mr. Sandhu is out and about. He's actually he's at the airport right now. Sandhu, is that right?
I am, Simon. This is gonna. Hopefully, we can make it through the show without any technical hiccups. But I'm on the Wi-Fi. You may hear the tannoy in the background with flight announcements being made and all sorts. But yeah, I'm in Glasgow Airport. I've got a few hours to kill until I fly back to London. I'm actually sitting alongside our very own MMA junkie colleague Per Hallstrom, who is actually in the middle of editing some pictures post-fight from UFC Fight Night Glasgow. And yeah, it's been a whirlwind week, Simon. We've got, like you said, a lot to talk about. It's going to be a packed show this week. And yeah, let's get to it.
Just before we start, I need to peel back the curtain for the listeners that hooking up this thing is not always the most straightforward of jobs. And when one of us is out and about trying to deal with Wi-Fi and all the rest of it, it gets a bit tricky. And I had a few problems getting hold of Sandhu. 1 minute I was talking to him, and then the next minute he went strangely quiet. Why did you go strangely quiet, Mr. Sandhu?
Well, listen, Simon, when you have our very own British UFC Octagon girl, Carly Baker, walk by and stop off and say hi to me and Per, you have to give her time of day. Look, you know what? I tell you what, I'm not being biased here just because she's British and she's our fellow countrywoman, but I have to say, of all the Octagon girls that I've met, and I've met a few in my time covering this sport, none are more sweeter, none are more nicer than Carly Baker. She literally is the quintessential girl next door. She always makes time for us. I'm always going to make sure she pops by and says hi. And we had a lot of catch up just now, talked about the fights last night, talked about how amazing the crowd was. And actually, she made a pretty good suggestion. I asked her what her next event was going to be, and she said it'll be Rotterdam, which is in September. And then she said, look, why can't, for Mayweather and McGregor, why can't they perhaps get half the UFC Octagon girls and then half the Mayweather promotion or Showtime ringside girls together as a sort of mix? Just another, caveat to this whole, spectacle and bringing the two worlds together, which I thought was a pretty good idea. But then she had to run off to catch her flight, and I said, look, what I'll try and do is get some sort of petition going in your favour to see if we can try and make that happen. So let's see.
Fantastic. I got blown out in favour of a chat with Octagon girl Carly Baker. I can't really complain about that, in fairness. I was like, what happened? And then he told me. I was like, okay, fair enough. Back to the show in hand. And let's try and do this chronologically. The past week has been nuts.
Yep.
Unless you've been living under a rock for the past week, it can't have escaped you that the Mayweather-McGregor World Tour has dominated the news cycle, both inside the MMA bubble and outside. And it's been at times controversial. It's been very loud. It's been very brash, and it all finished in London on Friday. Now you were up in Glasgow doing Media Day Fight Week on Thursday, but you managed to jet down to London to do Media Day with our buddy Abby Saban. And I've seen the footage. I've watched the interviews. I've watched all the behind the scenes. It looked like an absolute zoo. Just how crazy was it, mate?
It was a zoo is a good way to describe it, Simon. We were kind of like from a distance here on this side of the pond. We were following this international 3-country, 4-city tour from a distance. When it was in LA, then Toronto, and then New York, and seeing our colleagues stateside deal with the coverage. It looked just absolutely manic and stressful. Because at the end of the day, you've got the UFC PR team, then you've got the WME IMG PR team, then you've got staff from Mayweather Promotions and staff from Showtime, all trying to collaborate and communicate with MMA media, boxing media, mainstream media, print, digital, social, radio. There's just so many different outlets that want to get a piece of the pie, so to speak. They all wanted, to create content. They all wanted access. So it was absolutely, from my perspective, first of all, just an absolute career highlight. To be able to cover an event like that was just absolutely phenomenal from a personal point of view. And I'm just glad that things went so well for both me and Abby and our bosses over stateside, John Morgan, Dan Stupp, and all the rest of the crew. They were all just so happy with the coverage that we got from London. But yeah, it was crazy. So the way they had it split up was you had, and I don't know if anyone's listening that followed some of the pictures that I tweeted and on Instagram and on Twitter, and I'm sure you can tell from the actual video content as well. They had an entire section just for TV and digital, and that's where we were set up. Then they had a separate room just for print media, which is the kind of the newspapers and tabloids and what have you. So in our section, Simon, you had literally ITV Sport, and then it was MMA Junkie. It was freaking awesome. Like, thankfully, we got taken care of really, really well by the PR staff. And then after us, you had just every other media outlet scrumming together. So somehow, some way, we got to rub shoulders with the TV live broadcast feed crew from ITV Sport, and then a little bit later on that evening with Sky Sports News. And it was brilliant because they got dibs on the first interviews as everybody kind of walked by, and then right after them I got my chance to have a one-on-one interview with everybody, and then after that pretty much the subjects were kind of whisked away forward to just go into a scrum format. So to get one-on-one interviews with the likes of Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather, Dana White, Stephen Espinoza, Leonard Ellaby, and then later on that evening, after everything had wrapped up, I got some time with Conor McGregor's manager, Audie Attar, and also Conor McGregor's nutritionist, George Lockhart. Simon, as you know, in the field that we work in, trying to get one-on-one interviews for some of these characters, they don't grow on trees. Some guys will go through an entire career covering the sport and never get an opportunity to have those one-on-one interviews. So for me to get Mayweather, McGregor, and Dana White, and Espinoza, and Ellaby all in the space of a few hours, I was buzzing. I was on cloud nine. I hope everyone that watched the interviews that I conducted and the video content that was produced and edited by Abby, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you appreciated it. Yeah, I mean, I could just go on and talk about how amazing it was. Again, I have to say, I think we were really privileged and lucky that we got the access that we did. Because very easily, in these situations, Simon, you could be, and I felt sorry for some guys that were trying to get access and get a nice clean shot, but there were just so many people huddled around. Some people were raising their cameras because their tripods couldn't get through. You've got bodies in the way. So I think, thankfully, on our part, we were lucky enough and privileged enough to get the access that we did to get the interviews that I was able to conduct. And yeah, it was amazing, Simon. To be honest with you, I think I'm still buzzing off that moment, and it's going to be a day and an event and an experience that I'm going to cherish with me forever. I'm not going to forget too easily.
Yeah, getting all those A-list interviews in a career or in the space of like a couple of years is one thing. Having to do them back to back to back is, I can imagine the adrenaline rush was pretty high. So,
yeah.
But it's one of those, once you're in there, it's basically the same as you would do normally. It's just the person you're standing and pointing the mic at is somewhat more of a big hitter than some of the guys you normally talk to. So, the job's the same, but the stakes are higher, and it's but it all came across really well, mate. I tell you something, and I don't know whether you've had much time to sit down and sort of reflect on it all, but my unsung hero of that whole press tour was Leonard Ellaby. That man is completely unflappable throughout the entire. He looks like $1 million. In fact, he looks like $10 million. Always immaculately turned out, and he had that grin on his face for the entire press tour. It didn't matter what was going on. The expletives were being hurled at each other. It looked like, anything could have happened at that, at various points. They were nose to nose, yet nothing actually happened. Ellaby just stood there almost as if he'd gone into the future and seen that it was all going to be okay. And he just sat back, smiling contently as if to say, all this is doing is generating dollars. This is absolutely fantastic. And I thought that he was a bit of an unsung unsung star of the trip. But let me turn a question on you, Sandu, and I'll weigh in with my take afterwards. I'll turn a question on you that you used on a lot of the subjects that you spoke to during that incredible press event in London. How did you score it? We had 4 stops. We had Los Angeles, then Toronto, then Brooklyn, then London. Run me through your scorecard in terms of who came out best in the verbal exchanges as we went through the course of that incredible press tour.
Yeah, sure. And I think this is a fun thing to talk about and a fun thing to discuss. I mean, I know there's a few colleagues of ours out there in the MMA bubble who kind of frown upon doing something like this, but I think it's fun. I think it's a part of the process. It's another little caveat to this whole journey as we head towards August 26th. So I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. First of all, in terms of just pure entertainment, I think Toronto, without a shadow of a doubt, was number 1. I think then number 2 for me was London. Number 3 was LA. Then you had about 50 feet of dog poo. And then you had Brooklyn, right?
Oh, yeah.
Now, and now in terms of how I kind of broke everything down in terms of who won each round, so to speak, I gave Mayweather LA very narrowly. And I think a major part of that was because McGregor was on a crutch, so to speak. He didn't know what the format was going to be. He hadn't prepared anything. So he was, caught by a blindside on that one. Then Toronto, like, you could score that at 10-8 or a 10-7 or even a 10-6 to McGregor. That was arguably, in my opinion, not only the best. I don't want to call it a press conference. I mean, they kept calling it a press conference, but it wasn't. It was a show. But whatever you want to call this whole situation in terms of an event, it was probably the best event in combat sports regarding some sort of press exposure, the best I've ever seen in terms of crowd participation, in terms of what Mayweather and McGregor brought to the table, in terms of some of the zingers that came out. It was just, that was probably worth $100 by itself, let alone having to pay that for the actual fight come August 26th. Then you went to Brooklyn. To be honest, it was such a shit show of an event. I don't even know how I would score it. I mean, I think if you're looking at what went viral, what went through the roof in terms of social media. You had Conor McGregor there in a polar bear jacket, and even when Floyd threw all these kind of dollar bills in the air, the iconic image is of Conor McGregor in this polar bear jacket, with his top half of his body exposed, with these Ric Flair style trousers with some stunning shades on, and you just got all these dollar bills just floating in the air around him. So, it was a bit of a shit show. But in terms of who went more viral from that particular event, I'd give that to McGregor. And then I think in London, once again, crowd participation was back on form, just like it was in Toronto. Definitely the loudest crowd of the bunch. You had the British, and of course you had plenty of the Irish in attendance too, and you just knew that they were going to be singing all night long, and I'd give that to McGregor as well. I mean, there was a bit of a risque moment there where he kind of walked past Mayweather and kind of rubbed and tapped his dome, which I thought was, oh God, are we about to kind of have a physical altercation here? Because up until that moment, they'd been in each other's faces at every single destination. They'd faced off so many times, and they had kind of, verbally just been spewing, all sorts of, language under the sun at each other. But they hadn't physically kind of really kind of pushed their boundary, so to speak. And as a follically challenged man that I am, Simon, let me just tell you, if somebody went behind me and kind of rubbed or tapped or pushed my skull, that would definitely push my buttons. So I've got to give credit to Mayweather for keeping it cool, calm, and collected in that moment. But like I said, I'd score that for McGregor as well. So overall, I think McGregor won. Now, what does that mean? Did he get under Mayweather's skin? I don't think so. I mean, to be honest with you, Mayweather and McGregor are both winners here. And I think Mayweather, and I asked Mayweather about this as well, he, after all these years, Simon, He's finally got the best dance partner he's ever had.
He really has, yeah.
Really has. He's got his ultimate. They're a yin and a yang right now, and it's the perfect marriage of two entertainers who are going to bring the most amount of eyeballs on a combat sport situation that we've ever seen. So overall, I'd score it to McGregor, but let's be honest, they're both the big winners out of this one.
Absolutely. I mean, the way I saw it, I thought that Brooklyn was just so bad, and some of the stuff McGregor came out with was just so wrong that I couldn't give him that one. I thought that was a car crash of an event. As you say, you can't call them press conferences. It was like a cross between a live debate and a rap battle, but without the debating and without the rapping. You know what I mean? It was. If you wrote this down on paper, you'd say, "Don't do that. That's not going to work." And in some of the cities, it didn't. But in Toronto, it definitely did. Toronto was absolutely superb. McGregor was on absolutely stellar form. I thought he was great. And we saw the best of him on stage in Toronto, and he had the fans going, and it was great. I liked him in LA because he had to kind of wing it. And what we heard from McGregor in LA, he was speaking a bit more from the heart, talking about being a father and things like that. That's the real Conor McGregor sort of just seeping through a little bit. You've got the bravado, but we just had a little glimpse into the real Conor McGregor on the very first stop. Because he was caught on the hop, he didn't really know that he had to get up there and say too much. I think he thought he was going to get up there and someone was going to ask him some questions. But yeah, and I thought that under the circumstances he did pretty well. And I thought obviously he dominated proceedings in London, as you would expect. So I think if you're looking at it from a sort of a verbal jousting point of view, I think McGregor clearly won the tour, if you like. And as you say, it is a bit of fun. What does it count for? Absolutely nothing at all. Will it have any bearing whatsoever on fight night? Only if McGregor knocks out Mayweather inside 4 rounds, like he said. Because if he does, then we can go back to everything he said on the press tour, where he just kept ramming that point home. And we can say, do you know what? Mystic Max strikes again. If it doesn't happen, then really most of what was said on the press tour was just BS, bluster, bombast, and there just to sell tickets, which was the point of the whole tour. But, it would be remiss of us to not mention the fact that there were bad moments on this tour as well. We had misogynistic comments. We had comments that could be construed as having racial connotations. We also had a homophobic slur thrown in towards the end. None of that is what we want in the sport of, or in any sport for that matter, whether it be boxing, MMA, garden bowls, whatever. We don't want any of that. And both those guys, and particularly Conor, are more than capable of giving it the verbals and really having some fun with it without needing to go down that route. So it was disappointing that we saw some of that sort of stuff creeping in. And I think that was probably indicative of the fact that they were both beginning to run out of ideas. I mean, Floyd basically had one bit of material that he just repeated over all 4 events. Conor at least was trying to change things up and was perhaps trying a little bit too hard in Brooklyn when things seemed to sort of get away from him a little bit and the controversy began to kick in. But that's all done now. We've got a 6-week build-up and then we've got fight night itself. You can guarantee we'll be talking about this topic a little bit more from a sporting perspective as we get a little bit closer to fight night at the T-Mobile Arena on August the 26th. But let's get on to some MMA, shall we? We had an event that took place in Glasgow just last night. We're recording this on Monday, July 17th. Last night, Sunday the 16th, at the SSE Hydro, over 10,500 screaming Scottish fans packed the arena for UFC Fight Night 113. Ponzinibbio versus Nelson, or Nelson versus Ponzinibbio, as I think it was originally billed. This card got a lot of stick when it was being put together. Where are the big names? Are the UFC shortchanging the Scottish fans? Blah, 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 blah. The usual stuff we see when they put on a fight night card on these shores. But my goodness me, did they deliver, Sandu. What a night. Now, you were there as part of the media in the event. So it'd be interesting to get your take as opposed to mine. I had my feet up with a cold beer watching this one. It's been a long time since I've sat and watched a British-based UFC show and not actually being in the arena. So it was a different experience for me. But I have to say, as an event, I thought it was outstanding. We had shocks, we had great knockouts, we had some real wow moments, and of course we had a retirement of a bit of a legend around these parts in Neil Two Tap series. So let's talk about that main event first off, Sandy. Santiago Ponzinibbio versus Gunnar Nelson. I confidently predicted that Ponzinibbio was tailor-made for Gunnar Nelson, that he would come walking forward, throwing strikes, and he would walk straight into a bear trap and Nelson would take him down and choke him. Well, that didn't happen, did it? Ponzinibbio starched Nelson, huge straight left, and I think everybody except for Ponzinibbio's corner was in complete and utter shock. What was the reaction where you were standing?
That's the perfect way to describe it, Simon. Everybody was shocked. I think if you spoke to anybody in the media, everyone was picking Gunnar Nelson to win this fight. Everyone thought that he'd win it comfortably. And to see him knocked out within the first 90 seconds of the first round was just an absolute shocker. Got to give credit to Gunnar Nelson. You know, he turned up to the post-fight press conference and faced the music, spoke to the media, and he mentioned that at one point in the fight, just prior to the knockout, he was kind of eye poked, and at the time he felt as though he should have, spoken to the referee. Now, technically, it's up to the referee to jump in and actually stop the fight if he's seen an eye poke. But if a fighter, makes a beeline or makes some sort of gesture to the referee to indicate that they've been poked in the eye, 9 times out of 10, the referee does jump in and stop it just to kind of get it checked out. Now, in that split-second moment, he didn't do that, and he owned up to the fact that he didn't do that. He tried to kind of battle through it. He mentioned that he was seeing 2 Santiago Ponzinibbios in that moment, and while he had a bit of blurred vision, Santiago just kind of starched him, like you said, Simon, knocked him out. It was a brutal knockout. He absolutely slept him. And, and all of a sudden, Simon, you've now got yet another welterweight in Santiago Ponzinibbio, the Argentinian. How many fighters do we have from Argentina in the UFC that are making waves? He's just got a win in a main event against a marquee fighter in Gunnar Nelson. So it'll be interesting to see how the UFC books him moving forward.
Yeah, and there has been discussions about potentially the UFC doing a show in Argentina at some point in the future. I think Joe Carr might have mentioned it in an interview with our colleague John Morgan, that Argentina might be somewhere that they're looking to expand to. And as you say, they've not got that many Argentinian fighters. Off the top of my head, I think it may be 1, maybe 2. So, he really will be the sort of the man flying the flag for Argentina in the UFC. And if they do hold a show down there, then Ponzinibbio is obviously the guy to stick on the main event, assuming it's a fight night show, of course. Someone else who's making some waves is Cynthia Calvillo. She took on local favourite Joanne Calderwood in a strawweight contest. Jojo didn't make weight. She weighed in 2 pounds over the 116 limit, coming in at 118. And so she obviously lost 20% of her purse to Calvillo, which wasn't a great start to the fight weekend for her. And then the fight went to a decision, and it went to Calvillo, 30-27, 30-27, 29-28. Now, I scored it 29-28 to Calvillo, but I did think that it was an incredibly close fight. I thought Calvillo, to me, took round 1 and round 3. Round 2 was a close one. I wasn't sure how that one would go. I think I've probably edged it to Calderwood, but I can see why some judges scored it 30-27 because that middle round was close. How did you see it, and how impressed were you with Cynthia Calvillo? Obviously, you would have chatted to her during fight week as well.
Yeah, Simon, this was a weird one because I saw scores all over the place from obviously people within our MMA media circle that we both respect. And it was just one of those weird fights where every single round was fairly close. And for me, I definitely gave Cynthia rounds 1 and round 3, just from the pure fact that both rounds ended with a rear naked choke and an armbar attempt that had she had about 30 seconds more, it would have been game over. And I think a lot of fans and a lot of people out there perhaps still look too much at the striking element of the game and don't take into consideration or factor in the grappling and the jiu-jitsu as a way of kind of scoring points or kind of like, overly overall evaluating how you judge a particular round. But I gave Cynthia all 3 rounds, actually.
Okay.
I gave her rounds 1 and 3. That you're right, that middle round was probably the closest round of the bunch, but I still scored it for Cynthia. I just thought her head movement, her footwork was just phenomenal. At times, it was almost mimicking Dominic Cruz and TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt, which is obviously evident from the fact that she is part of Team Alpha Male, so that's no surprise there. But I was actually, when we got back to the hotel room afterwards, I was actually speaking to Alstrom, MMA Junkie Per, and he told me of all the fights last night, he had such a hard time trying to get a decent shot of Cynthia because her movement was so quick and rapid.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think Joanne, she was attempting a lot of strikes, but from me, from my vantage point, she just wasn't landing as clean as perhaps what may have looked on TV, considering the output she was giving. Whereas I think Cynthia was a little bit more economical. She busted up Calderwood's nose. Calderwood's nose was a bloody mess afterwards. But to be honest with you, look, even if you gave Joanne that second round, Cynthia definitely locked in that first and third round for at least a 29-28. And now what you've got, Simon, you've got Cynthia, who's on a 3-fight win streak in the UFC, in the strawweight division. Dana White is a massive fan of hers. She's the only fighter in the UFC that's got 3 wins this year. She's now beelining for the upper echelon of that top 10. And I think perhaps one more win, and you could be looking at the next challenger for Joanna Jędrzejczyk's title. She's already kind of made a bit of an effort, I've seen this morning, in regards to trying to get a fight with Michelle Waterson. That's an interesting one. I actually think it would be quite poetic if she tries to, speak to the UFC and actually get on the Polish card at the end of this year. If she wants to, make some noise and try and get a fight with Joanna Jędrzejczyk, beating a top-ranked opponent in Joanna Jędrzejczyk's backyard of Poland, that should get the job done.
Yeah, I think the sky is the limit for her. Clearly, Dana White is very taken by her. Some of the comments that he's made to the press already about her potential in that UFC 115-pound division. She's beaten Amanda Cooper, Pearl Gonzalez, and Joanne Calderwood so far in her UFC career, and she's looked impressive in all three fights. Obviously, the first 2 were submission finishes, but the Joanne Calderwood fight, she needed to go to the scorecards. The point on the scoring, Sandu, and this is the thing that and I think you make a good point about people being too focused on the striking, because that tends to be where the fights sort of start off, and it can take a while before grappling becomes a factor in the fight. And I think Calderwood was shading the grappling in the first round in particular. I thought she was doing a little bit better than Cynthia, but she was, it was just shading it. And then once Cynthia got to the mat, Cynthia nearly finished the fight. So that element of the fight should be scored and weighted much, much more heavily than Joanne just edging the striking. So I think, and that's why that round was obviously a Cynthia Calvillo round. Likewise, round 3. So I don't think it was that controversial a decision, to be honest. I know Jojo wasn't happy about it afterwards, and obviously there's an amount of disappointment immediately after the decision that needs to subside and all of that, and people are asking a question straight away. But she wasn't happy. But I thought that was a clear win for Cynthia, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see who they give her. Looking at the list, Waterson would certainly be a fan-friendly fight. One that you could imagine them headlining like a Fox show with that, or maybe a fight night show in the States, or as like a co-main even on a pay-per-view. But we'll see. I mean, I think that's an interesting one. Tisha Torres is up there, but I think there are options for Cynthia, but I do think she needs a little bit more seasoning. I think realistically she needs to win another couple, because I think there were certain elements of that fight that led me to think that she still has a little bit to learn in the stand-up department, and I think she was allowing Jojo to sort of dictate the pace a little bit early on, and against someone who was perhaps a little bit more seasoned in terms of defending takedowns, that may have come back to bite her towards the end of the fight. But yeah, she's got a huge upside, and I'm really excited to see what happens next for Cynthia Calvillo. One of the moments of the night for me, and also one of the more controversial moments of the night, came in the fight that preceded that, the lightweight fight between Paul Felder and Stevie Ray. I think a lot of us, myself included, had this one pegged as a potential fight of the night contender. It didn't really go for long enough for it to be considered a fight of the night contender, really. Felder knocking out Stevie Ray with elbows at the 3:57 mark of the opening round. I don't know what your vantage point was like for this fight, Sandu, or whether you've had the chance to watch it on a screen. Stevie Ray got knocked out twice in that fight, and the fight should have been stopped a good 10-15 seconds before it did. Because when Felder dropped Stevie Ray with a big knee the first time, Ray was out. He was absolutely out cold, and Felder's strikes on the mat actually woke Stevie back up again. And I don't know, I think Grant Waterman was the ref. It's possible that he didn't have the view that the cameraman had at that exact moment. He might not have had that exact angle, but yeah, Stevie was out. And whenever you see someone get knocked out like that, the last thing you want is to see them taking additional shots. So it was a difficult one to watch at times, but all credit to Paul Felder, who told his story after the fight about he lost his father to pancreatic cancer at the start of his fight camp. He was wearing a chain after the fight, which has a little vial on it, which had some of his father's ashes in it. And we've both met and had the pleasure of chatting to Paul Felder over a beer in Belfast. And a nicer bloke you couldn't wish to meet. Absolutely lovely guy. And he picked up a big win on Sunday night.
Yeah, he did. And it's interesting you say that Ray was out, because you have a much better view, Simon, as we know, when you're watching from the comfort of your own home, and you've got all these amazing close-up shots from the UFC production and broadcast. From my vantage point, sitting cage side, constantly looking from my laptop to the cage, from the laptop to the cage. Don't get me wrong, we both know it's great to be cage side, but there are times where you miss things, and that's why I always say, even for judges, it is pretty hard to score a fight sometimes, so, we give them stick now and then, but, I can sympathize with them as well, because it's a tough job. I actually didn't catch that first knockout, to be honest with you. I just thought maybe he was rocked a little bit, but I didn't know if he was completely out, and a follow-up shot from Felder actually woke him back up again. But regardless, I think the major storyline, Simon, coming into this for Stevie Ray was the fact that he was rolling the dice with his career. It was the last fight on his contract. Had he won, he would have been 6-1 in the UFC, and that would have given him plenty of bargaining power when it came to the negotiation table to figure out a new contract. He mentioned and talked to us about his fight week that ideally he'd like to re-sign with the UFC, but having said that, if there's a bigger, better, and more lucrative offer out there, that would be something that he'd have to take into consideration, especially when you know that these fighters have a very short career, and they want to try and make as much money as possible. So he now ends his UFC run on 5-2 on a loss. So we'll see what the UFC give him in terms of an offer. One question, without a doubt, is that Stevie Ray is a massive draw in Scotland specifically, and if the UFC want to continue to come back to Glasgow, they need the likes of a Stevie Ray and a Joanne Calderwood and a Paul Craig, and now Danny Henry as well. But Calderwood and Stevie Ray, those are the two that are the real superstars of Scottish MMA, so to speak. I'm sure you would have heard on the broadcast, Simon, the crowd were just absolutely fantastic, super electric, at times rivaling, at times beating the Irish fans in Dublin, when Stevie and Joanne walked out. And it's interesting because when Paul Felder spoke to us in the post-fight press conference, he said, the Scottish fans put the Brazilians to shame, and we know that the Brazilians can be fairly loud as well. But for Paul Felder, this is great. He's now got a couple of wins, a couple of finishes, a couple of bonuses. Plus, he's now heading into his first duty as a commentator for Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. So things are going really, really well professionally for Paul Felder.
Yeah, and as I say, top bloke as well. And one of those guys who, when you see his name on a fight card, you know you're going to get an exciting fight. He always brings it, always brings an exciting fight, never takes a backward step. And, if you're building your dream fight card and you're putting people into place, I would suggest that you ask around a lot of hardcore fans and you say, do you think we should put Paul Felder on that card somewhere? Most of them would say yes, just because he's that kind of fighter. He's a fighter's fighter, he's a fan's fighter. And while he did beat a local favourite in Stevie Ray, he still was given an awful amount of respect from the Scottish fans on the microphone afterwards, and justifiably so. Middleweights were in the cage before those two. Jack Marshman versus Ryan James. This, for me, was a really interesting fight to watch. Interesting clash of styles. Marshman got the nod, 29-28 on all three scorecards. And that was how I scored it, but boy, was it close. I thought Marshman took the first round. I thought James took the third round. And again, it come down to that middle round, and which was very, very close. I was actually slightly surprised that all three judges saw it the same, because that second round was so close. It wouldn't have surprised me at all if one of the judges had gone the other way and we'd ended up with a split decision. But it was one of those fights. It was a frustrating one for Marshman, who went in there and he said in a post-fight interview that landing the first shot on James is something that he had no problem doing, but following up with the big second shot was something that they've worked on a lot in training camp. But James' ability to just pull his chin just out the way, having taken that initial first shot, that frustrated Marshman throughout the fight. And James can take a good shot, as we learned. But that was a hard-earned win for Jack Marshman, Sandu.
This is an interesting one, Simon, because, as you know, we wear many hats when it comes to fight night. And although I had a cage-side seat, I actually spent the majority of the night running backwards and forwards to the back. The majority of the prelims and the early part of the main card, I was actually backstage for the majority of it, shooting and interviewing the fighters in the post-fight scrums, and then shuttling backwards and forwards to Abbey, passing him memory cards so that he could get the edits done and then upload them to the MMA Junkie YouTube channel, and then get them over to our colleagues writing the stories. So while the Marshman-James fight was going on, I was actually involved in an Alistair Overeem media scrum backstage. So I actually didn't watch the fight at all. But I did actually speak to, again, Per Hallstrom in our hotel room afterwards. And for him, it was the fight of the night. That was the fight that he enjoyed the most. I honestly can't weigh in here, Simon, because I actually haven't seen the fight. I kind of got back to my cage side seat just towards the latter part of the third round. But that's not enough for me to evaluate who won or who didn't. So yeah, I can't really give you too much there, Si. Sorry.
That's all right, mate. That's all right. I mean, interesting that Per thought it was fight of the night. I thought it was one of the fights of the night. For me, it wasn't the fight of the night. I found it fascinating in that it was an interesting clash of styles. James was fighting off the back foot a lot, being very mobile. I tweeted quite early on in the fight saying James needs to keep this movement up, because if he stands still in front of Marshman, he'll get slept. And credit to the Canadian, he kept that movement throughout all three rounds, which it doesn't show as it being anything particularly spectacular, but it really is testament to the guy's conditioning, because to be able to do that, fighting off the back foot, keeping his concentration while still scoring, and remembering, to just keep moving, lateral movement, and not being consistent with it, moving, sort of changing sides, and just presenting a constantly moving, unpredictable target. That for me was very impressive to see. But it was Marshman's aggression that really did get him the fight in the end, and a good win for the Hammer, Jack Marshman, who he's never in a boring fight, and he always comes out of it looking like he's He's been massively beat up. He's got one of those faces that just puffs up really easy. He's always got an eye sort of swollen up every fight, every single time without fail. Jack Marshman comes in looking like he's been beaten up by about 3 people. But normally he wins his fights. He's an exciting guy to watch. Someone else who I think we need to be keeping an eye on, Sandu, and if you blinked towards the end of this fight, you definitely would have missed what happened. Khalil Roundtree versus Paul Craig. These two had some sort of simmering rivalry going on. And Roundtree was just staring a hole through Paul Craig all the way through the introductions to their light heavyweight fight. And to be honest, the majority of the fight was pretty nondescript. Not that much happened. They were both standing off each other. Craig looked very nervous, and he threw out a few leg kicks, but really wasn't in range to score with them. And Roundtree was just waiting his moment, and then when he timed his moment, he got it spot on. Big shots, dropped Paul Craig, and then some absolutely vicious ground and pound finished it at the 4:56 mark at the end of round 1. Now, we know Paul Craig, he's a great character, great bloke to talk to. He's a teacher by trade, and he's gone into the UFC. He's become a little bit of a cult favourite. I know the media guys love him, but Roundtree, who had a bit of a rocky start to his career in the UFC, is beginning to turn himself into a dangerous looking prospect. Sandy, did you catch any of this one?
Well, you said, Simon, if you blink, you'll miss it.
You blinked.
Or if you're backstage and conducting a post-fight media scrum with Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts, you'll also miss it. So this was another one that I unfortunately see. People think, Simon, that we've got the best jobs in the world, and we do to a certain extent. But if you think that it's all just about getting to see all the fights and eating some popcorn and chilling out on a fight night, it's far from it.
No.
So I actually didn't catch this fight whatsoever. I actually ended up seeing the knockout on the UFC Europe social media feed on Twitter. So I did see the finish. And, I mean, all I can say is, Khalil Roundtree told us in the post-fight media scrum that he's not here for a long time. He wants to try and get up the ranks as soon as possible, which is very possible in that light heavyweight division at the moment. So he's making a bit of noise now and trying to get another fight in as soon as possible. For Paul Craig, Simon, now this is a bit of a strange one now because his UFC career isn't getting off to the best start, is it? And he's gone all in on this. He's kind of quit his job as a teacher. He's told us that he's now going to be training with the All-Star Gym in Stockholm, Sweden. This is a massive financial commitment for him to do this. And you know what, Simon? He needs to get a win. He needs to get a win pretty bad because just turning up to get the show money. At this level where, considering what he'd probably be on, isn't going to cut it. I thought he was fantastic during fight week with the media. Had the war paint going at the ceremonial weigh-ins, which is always money, a great picture and a great moment. But again, Simon, at this level in the UFC, there's a bunch of killers out there, and who knows if the moment and the occasion of fighting, in Glasgow got to him. And you mentioned that he was a little bit nervous, or looked a little bit nervous at the start of the fight. And unfortunately, Paul Craig has now become officially in the record books the very first Scot to lose at a UFC event in Glasgow. It was a whitewash for them in 2015. Earlier on this card, Danny Henry kept the streak alive. And of course, Paul Craig became the first guy to lose. And overall, that main card with Paul losing and Stevie Ray losing and then Joanne Calderwood losing, for all the support that they had from the fans, unfortunately, not one of them could give them a highlight moment to walk away with come the end of the night.
Yeah, it was one of those nights. The first Glasgow show was just one of those where momentum just built as the night went on, and the Scots really rose to the occasion. Wasn't to be on Sunday night at the Hydro. Talking about highlights, the main card opener, Justin Willis versus James Mulheron. No highlights in that fight. Justin Willis's nickname is Big Pretty, and while there were two big guys in there, it weren't pretty. It wasn't a good fight. Justin Willis took the unanimous decision, 30-27 on all three scorecards. Mulheron, British heavyweight, making his debut. I think he's going to struggle in the UFC, largely down to size as much as anything. You know, he was conceding about 20 or 30 pounds to his opponent. He's quite short for a heavyweight, and he's got a very short reach. None of that augurs well when you're stepping into the UFC heavyweight division. There's also the fact that it was his debut as well. So hopefully when he comes back next time round, we'll see a little bit more out of James Mulheron. But that fight with Justin Willis, don't bother watching that one back on Fight Pass, Sandu. It wasn't up to much. But the preliminary card was outstanding. We had some great matches. All 4 of the matches on the televised prelims were absolute bangers. Danny Roberts against Bobby Nash. That was a really good, strong, competitive fight between 2 guys, striker versus wrestler. And Bobby Nash had some early success with his wrestling. And in the second round, Danny Roberts came out and slept him. Absolute peach of a shot. Dropped Nash onto the seat of his pants. Head hit the canvas. Roberts went in with a follow-up shot. But I think Rich Mitchell, the ref, dived in and stopped it. I know Nash's corner said that the stoppage was early. I don't know. I think Roberts would only have added another couple more shots, and the fight would have been over anyway. So, great performance from Danny Roberts. You and I were cage side for his previous outing at UFC 204 against Platinum Mike Perry, and we were in awe of both of those guys in that fight, just for the amount of punishment that they were able to dish out and take over a 3-round fight. And Roberts needed to take a lot of time out. I think he needed to have his eye socket reconstructed, and just needed a little bit of time to get everything back in order. And he came back in a big way. That was hugely impressive from the man called Hot Chocolate.
Yeah, we spoke about this, Simon. You know, we were both there, like you said, in Manchester, and I was really kind of looking forward to and anticipating Danny Roberts' return. And boy, would I come back now again, Simon. Unfortunately, while this fight was going on, I was involved in yet another media scrum backstage, this time with Neil Two Tap Siri, and that was an important interview for all of us to conduct. So I actually missed this fight, but I did see the finish on the UFC Europe social media feed. And, you know, to give some kind of insight, you know, all the post-fight interviews and scrums are all on the MMA Junkie YouTube channel for anyone that wants to check it out. But for this fight for Danny Roberts, it wasn't just about coming back off that loss to Mike Perry and getting back in the win column. He's had some personal troubles in the last couple of months. He's kind of broken up with his other half. So that's obviously, you know, quite a stressful and emotional thing to go through, and there's kids involved and all sorts. So for him, just to kind of get a win in the UFC, to at least make sure his professional career is on the right track, meant a lot to him. And you know, he is part of the Brit pack, so to speak, Simon. So it's just great to see him smiling, happy, winning, and looking forward to seeing his return in the future. Yeah,
he's one of those guys. He's very happy-go-lucky sort of character, but once he's in the cage, he's all business. And for me, he's one of the most exciting British guys to watch right now. He's got that great blend of slick striking skills, but his takedown defense isn't too bad, and he's got a little bit on the ground as well. I think he's an exciting guy, and the more he continues to work on his game and gradually moves his way up those welterweight rankings. He asked to fight Alan Jouban next, and I think that's a great call out. I think that's a really nice, nicely pitched call out. I think that's the sort of opponent who will, if he can beat him moving forward without having to make sort of a huge quantum leap forward. So looking forward to seeing the next step for Hot Chocolate Danny Roberts. You mentioned Neil Siri, Sandu. We'll talk about your conversation with him in a sec. He took on Alexandre Pantoja of Brazil, who was already ranked in the flyweight division, and it was a thoroughly entertaining fight. For me, it was up there as a potential fight of the night contender. I thought it went really well. It looked really good on TV. Both men throwing heat throughout all 3 rounds, and then eventually in that 3rd round, I think Pantoja. I thought the fight was even. I thought Pantoja won the 1st round. I thought Siri came back well in the 2nd round, and I thought began to impart his will a little bit on the Brazilian, and really started to sort of plant his feet and throw some really strong stuff. in that second round, and through sort of almost force of will took that second round on my scorecard. Then it was down to what would happen in that third round, and Pantoja wisely went to the takedown, got Siri on his back, and eventually worked his way to a rear naked choke. It wasn't the way that Two Tap wanted to go out. Obviously, I think it was the 29th fight of his professional career. Wanted to go out with a win, but went out on his shield after another typically entertaining Neil Siri fight. I think the decision to retire, given his age, is probably a wise one. But I have to say, I'm going to miss chatting to him in fight week because he was always good value, always joking around with his team. And I'm going to miss watching him fight because, just like Brad Pickett before him, he's another one of those guys who, you see him on the fight card, you know you're going to get a good fight. And while I think it's probably the right decision for him, it'll be a shame that we know now that we're not going to see another Neil Siri fight in the UFC. You spoke to him backstage, Sandhu. What were his emotions like? He seemed to keep everything in check when he spoke to Dan Hardy in the Octagon. How was he when you chatted to him backstage afterwards?
I'll get to that in a second, Simon. But I made a point, and I spoke to Abby. We were conducting post-fight interviews backstage, and then there was a bit of a gap, and I was hoping there'd be enough of a gap in proceedings in the mix zone backstage for me to pop back cage side and watch this fight. Thankfully, I got the opportunity to do that. To see Neil Siri walk out for the final time and compete in the UFC Octagon was something that I wanted to be there present for. So I did see the fight in its entirety. And, he got a great reception, Simon, from the Scottish fans. I'm sure there were a lot of hardcore MMA fans that have seen his career. Maybe not from the beginning, maybe not maybe some had seen him in Cage Warriors, but even just his UFC run over the last couple of years. And, he was part of that magic moment in Dublin back in the summer of 2014, which everybody remembers as one of the most electric atmospheres you'll ever see in any UFC event, period. It was unfortunate that he couldn't, finish his career on a win. We saw the same thing happen, Simon, in London, with Brad Pickett. These things happen. Not everyone can go out on a high, so to speak. But, speaking to us backstage, there were kind of two takeaways that I had with the conversation, Simon. Number one, Neil Siri right now is a very scared man because he doesn't know what he's going to do next with his life now that his fight career is over, and as the sport continues to grow, maybe the UFC can do something. I know some of the other professional sports leagues out there, like, the Premier League and Champions League, but the other major, football leagues in Europe and the NFL, NBA, NHL, stateside, they have psychiatrists, they have, almost like, career specialists. They have that will help these athletes transition into the next stage of their lives by speaking to them, figuring out what they want to do next. Because, we're not fighters, Simon, but we've been around enough of them to be able to say something like this. And when you've been a fighter your entire life, and all of a sudden it's over, it's so hard to let go, because the adrenaline rush to walk out in packed, sold-out arenas is something that you'll never be able to replicate in any form or fashion or any walk of life ever again, And all of a sudden, one day, it's all over, and there's nothing that you can replace it with. So he's really scared in terms of what happens in terms of his life next. And the big take that he was really kind of urging and hoping that the next generation of fighters, even the current generation of fighters, Simon, they start to become more smarter with the money that they do earn in the fight business and the fight game. He sees too many fighters, squander their earnings on fancy cars and houses and this and that, and then they don't have much to show for it at the end of their fight career, apart from some, busted noses and some scars on their bodies. So that's what he was kind of hoping to preach for the next gen of fighters coming through. So those are the two main takeaways, and obviously without a doubt, everyone backstage, once the interview was over, made sure to shake his hand and thank him for the career and for the moments that he's given all of us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's one of those guys, and I think it goes not just for fighters. I think it goes for a lot of professional sportsmen, whether they're football players or cricketers, or it could be anything. Once that competitive edge and the adrenaline rush is gone. It's very hard to replace it. But we wish Neil Seery well. We know he's got a family, and I'm sure they'll keep him busy for sure. But yeah, all the best to Neil Two Tap Seery in his retirement from the sport of mixed martial arts. Now, one person who it looks like we're going to be seeing a little bit more of is British welterweight Galore Bafando. He took on Charlie Ward, stablemate of a certain Conor McGregor, in a welterweight matchup, and I really didn't know what to expect from this. Charlie Ward got decimated on his UFC debut, knocked out very quickly in the first round. Haven't seen much of Galore Bafando. What I have seen has been pretty spectacular, but not anywhere near UFC level opposition. So it was a real sort of journey into the unknown. How would this fight go? And Bafando looked the part. He put on a great display, showed some spectacular techniques, and then the knockout when it came was just plain bizarre. Charlie Ward had enough of having spinning stuff thrown at him, decided to close the distance and push Bafando up against the cage. Bafando managed to wriggle himself away from the cage and execute. It was almost like a hip throw, but he threw Ward, and Ward, it was basically Ward's temple, I think, hit the mat first, and that was enough to knock him out. Bafando sort of went in with another strike to completely put the cap on it. Referee jumped in, fight over. One of the most bizarre knockouts I've seen in a long time, but Bafando looks like someone who he's going to be a lot of fun to watch for as long as he's in the UFC, Sandu.
Yeah, so Bafando, for those that don't know, is part of the London Shoot Fighters gym and the London Shoot Fighters camp. A good friend of one Michael Venom Page. And if anybody saw the ceremonial weigh-ins, you would have seen him do this kind of spectacular, I suppose, I don't know what to call it, Simon. He was kind of like kicking away on the spot and also kind of hopping on the other leg as kind of made his way forward to the scales and to pose in front of the fans here in Glasgow. But yeah, it was just a bizarre and spectacular and weird knockout. I've never seen anybody knocked out, from my recollection anyway, by just being thrown to the canvas like that. And yeah, I mean, what can you say? I mean, when we were speaking to him, he kind of mentioned that he was close to quitting. He was literally eating some cheesecake one day, and all of a sudden he got the call, right, you're going to get a shot in the UFC. We've got X number of weeks to kind of get you prepared. And he kind of just thought, right, I better get in the gym and get down to business here. Now he's got the opportunity. He's won. He kind of just reflected and said, look, something in the universe told him that God's given him these arms and these legs and he's wasting them. And now he's got this kind of motivation to really utilize them to the best of his ability. And so I think we're going to see more of him in the UFC. And he looks like a frightening character in the cage. So I'm actually really looking forward to seeing him back in the cage sooner rather than later.
And he wants to fight Artem Lobov at lightweight. I like the sound of this. Artem Lobov obviously fights at featherweight. He'd probably be happy enough to fight at lightweight. He'll fight at any weight, Artem. And he doesn't turn down call-outs either. He'll fight anyone. And Bafando thinks he could get down to 155. Bafando versus Artem would be a fun fight to put on a European fight card. Maybe one later this year, who knows. But that, to me, that sounds like money to me. What do you reckon?
You know what? Someone mentioned this on Twitter, and I can't remember who it was. I think Artem Lobov's become the new Michael Bisping side.
He really has.
He's getting called out left, right, and centre. Who would have thunk it? Artem Lobov, he's just a man in demand. So he's in a good spot because I think a lot of people and a lot of guys want to fight him. He obviously wants to continue to fight in the UFC. And, if we can get Bafando and Artem Lobov, sweet. I'm game for that. I think if we can get anyone an Artem Lobov, I'll be game because Artem is a character and he brings it. He went the distance with Cub Swanson, which tells you everything that you need to know about him there. So, let's do it. Why not?
This is assuming that Artem isn't fighting one of Mayweather's bodyguards first. There seemed to be
somebody said, Simon.
Go on.
Somebody said, I think Artem Lobov might already be booked. He might be in the co-main event on the main mat card by fighting or boxing with Manny Pacquiao.
Behave yourself. Behave yourself. But yeah, Galore Bafando, spectacular stuff from him. Looking forward to seeing who he fights next, whether it be Artem Lobov or someone else remains to be seen. Someone else who made a pretty impressive showing on his UFC debut was Scotland's own Danny Henry, the lone Scottish winner on UFC Fight Night 113. He took on Daniel Tamer, who we've heard a lot about, Sandu, brother of David Tamer, and we'd been told if you think David Tamer's a crazy man, wait till you see Daniel Tamer. And he delivered as advertised. He came in throwing absolute haymakers from the get-go. And he had Danny Henry in a lot of trouble in the opening round of their lightweight contest. Now, both of these guys normally compete at featherweight. And at lightweight, I think that really did give the advantage to Danny Henry, who was a much, much bigger guy. I think as the fight began to wear on, that size advantage, plus the fact that Tamer had never been out of the first round in his entire career, started to turn the fight in the Scots' favour. And he gradually worked his way back into it. And by the end of it, the crowd were on their feet, making a deafening din as Henry took it down the stretch and came very close to beating Tamer inside the distance. He had one opportunity where it looked to me, if he carried on throwing strikes, he would have finished him. But instead, he went to take him to the mat, which, if anything, extended the fight a little bit. But Danny Henry got the unanimous decision, 29-28, 29-28, and 29-26 on one of those scorecards. Great performance from Danny Henry. How happy was he when you got to him backstage?
Well, this is an interesting one because I saw the first round, Simon, and I thought, right, like you said just now, Si, Daniel Tamer, as advertised, he's bringing it big time. I saw the first round, and then we had to go and start the post-fight scrum with Brett Johns. So I thought, right, if Daniel Tamer continues that for at least one more round, that's him getting the win in the bag. So to then find out later on that him, I was like, wow, I was really surprised and shocked considering how that first round went. But, credit to Daniel Tamer. I've seen actually some posts on social media, on Facebook and Instagram, by his manager and his coach and even his brother. Daniel Tamer today is in a cast because he's got a broken hand. And he says that he broke that hand in the first round, which kind of lets you look at the fight perhaps in a bit of a different way, considering how he was not able to kind of go gung-ho like he did in that first round in rounds 2 and 3. But all credit to Danny Henry. Took the fight in short notice, Simon. Only had about 4 weeks to prepare himself. Got the call last minute and was the only Scot to win on the card. Spoke to us backstage. The guy still has a full-time job as a security guard. This was a dream come true for him. And he's just over the moon and ecstatic to have been able to perform in Glasgow in front of his home fans, to fight for the UFC. You know, it's been a long time coming. He's recently fought for the EFC. So, yeah, this is what fighters are itching and scratching to get to the UFC. And when you get these short notice, calls to jump in, how many fighters, Simon, do you think would have been, eager to get in there with Daniel Tamer, who's got about something between 30 and 40 pro kickboxing fights under his belt? I think with about 28 or so knockouts. I mean, with a full camp. So credit to Danny Henry for stepping up and getting the job done. Actually, this fight was the fight of the night and got himself a nice 50K fight of the night. So good for him.
Yeah, absolutely. And Danny Henry, he won the featherweight title down there in South Africa with the EFC before getting the call to step in and take on Daniel Tamer here at UFC Fight Night Glasgow. Great performance from Danny Henry. Looking forward to seeing where he goes in his UFC career. 2 more fights on the card. Brett Johns versus Albert Morales. I love this fight. For me, this was a sleeper for fight of the night, but Henry versus Tamer just shaded it. Johns, I thought, was outstanding. He really is looking the real deal at bantamweight. He's got decent boxing. He's got good fight IQ, and his top pressure once he's got you on the mat is as good as they get at 135 pounds, in my opinion. He looks like he could become a contender. If he starts to move up the ladder and start picking up more wins, I think he's undefeated on, I think it's 14-0 or 15-0 now. 14-0 he is, and that was a hugely impressive performance. Bear in mind, Sandu, the only other guy to beat Albert Morales was a certain Brazilian by the name of Thomas Almeida. So he's in good company, Brett Johns. He's one of only two guys to beat Albert Morales. And for me, that was one of the performances of the night. I know he didn't get a bonus. Officially, I wonder if he got a locker room bonus. He looked really fired up as he came out. He's absolutely screaming at the camera as he was making his way down to the cage before he got in there and threw down with Morales. Great, he's a great character as well, and he looks like a serious threat at 135, Sandy.
Yeah, he does. Look, undefeated, off to a great start in the UFC. I think get him going. Let's get him a top 15 ranked. Let's see how far, or maybe even a top 10 ranked opponent. Let's see, what he's made of, how far he wants to go. Speaking to him backstage, he's really eager. Now he's fought a couple of times in the UK for the UFC. He really wants to fight a big card in New York or perhaps in Vegas. And actually, speaking of Vegas, he was speaking very highly of the Performance Institute, and said that one of the reasons he wants to fight in Vegas is so that he can perhaps get out there maybe 3 or 4 weeks out and actually make use of that Performance Institute. And for those that don't know, if you're a UFC fighter, access to this amazing state-of-the-art facility 24/7, plus the UFC, they comp you a free breakfast meal and a free lunch. So all you have to do is take care of your dinner and, boarding. And for fighters that perhaps are, starting to make their way up the pay scale, that perhaps, don't have the best facilities in certain parts of the world, but fight for the UFC, this is an amazing, amazing opportunity. Plus, it allows you to be, in front of UFC personnel, back office staff, President Dana White, Ari Emanuel, all these folks who are essentially responsible for trying to make stars out of these guys. So to kind of build a rapport there, to build relationships, to have that regular contact with these folks, that doesn't hurt either. So I'm really kind of interested to see what happens next for Brett Johns. Of course, he'd love to see an event take place in Wales. He told us that he doesn't think that is the right size venue that's got a roof over that can host one of these European fight night events. So he's now looking to jump across the pond and get onto a big card.
Yeah, absolutely. And he won that one pretty decisively, 30-27, 30-27, and one card even giving him 30-25. Big win for Brett Johns. And it's almost easy to have forgotten how good the very first fight of the night was. Leslie Smith against Amanda Lemos was an absolute war. And both of these ladies absolutely threw down. Thoroughly entertaining scrap. Leslie Smith eventually getting the TKO with a vicious flurry of elbows and punches midway through that second round. But what a way to kick off the fight night. And even a little call out for an MMA Fighters Union in her post-fight speech. Leslie the Peacemaker Smith. That was seriously impressive and the perfect way to kick off fight night over there in Glasgow, Sandu.
Simon, you know what? This was actually my fight of the night. Now, bearing in mind, you've obviously heard me say I've missed a few fights. Now, from all the fights that I did see, this was my favorite fight of the night. Amanda Lemos, so technical, was teeing off on Leslie Smith in that first round. Done really well, and then Leslie Smith came back hard in that second round. It was a firefight. Both ladies were absolutely game, throwing leather. It was such an entertaining fight. And when Leslie Smith won, obviously called out Betch Gahea, great move. That's a great fight. That's a great fight for her. And she kind of mentioned that, in the UFC's, bantamweight division, all it takes is around, 4 wins to get yourself a title shot. And she's now looking for number 3, and hopefully that'll be Betch Gahea. After the fight, it was a great moment. I posted it on social media. Anyone wants to check it out, it's on my Twitter feed. And Leslie Smith came out of the octagon and then made a beeline for a bunch of fans that were supporting and cheering her on. And it was a great moment where she embraced them and gave a few high fives. Considering the fact, Simon, she had to be transported to the hospital right after because her leg was absolutely destroyed. Her lead left leg was chopped left, right, and centre by Amanda Lemos in that first round and early parts of that second round as well. So, yeah, got nothing but praise and great things to say about Leslie Smith. And I'm really hoping that the UFC can put this Betchka hair fight together, because I think that'll be fireworks.
It was such a common sense call out, and the way she actually set it up as well. You know, she really did state her case. She did it really clearly. You came away going, yes, they have to make that fight. And it makes complete sense. Make the fight. It makes total sense. And Leslie Smith always brings the action in the UFC. Let's not forget, she stood toe-to-toe with Chris Cyborg and had no qualms in doing so, when many people would not even step through the cage door to face her. So all props to Leslie Smith. Great performance to kick off UFC Fight Night in Glasgow. You mentioned the official fight of the night was Danny Henry versus Daniel Tamer, 50k each, nicely done. Performance of the night bonuses went quite understandably to Santiago Ponzinibbio for that stunning first round knockout of Gunnar Nelson, and also thoroughly deserved Paul Felder. And given what he's had to go through over the last couple of months, that's a nice little present for Felder and his family as they look to come out the other side after a very, very difficult period for the Felder family. All the best to them. That was UFC Fight Night. Nelson versus Ponzinibbio. But the hits just keep on coming, Sandu. This weekend, UFC on Fox, Weidman versus Gastelum at the Nassau Coliseum in Uniondale, New York. And Chris Weidman and Kelvin Gastelum at middleweight in the main event. Dennis Bermudez, Darren Elkins, after Elkins' incredible win in his last outing. They're the co-main. Patrick Cummins, John Vellante, Jimmy Rivera against Thomas Almeida. That will be fire. So many interesting matchups on this card. It's going to be more must-see TV. It's not pay-per-view level, but it's going to be fun, Sandu. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, Simon, because normally we'll end these shows by kind of previewing the following week's event, and I just haven't had a chance to decompress yet. I haven't had a chance to decompress from this spectacular, Mayweather-McGregor international press tour that we were having to absorb last week. I haven't had a chance to decompress from UFC Fight Night Glasgow, which I'm just hours away removed from that one. But yeah, I mean, you look at it on paper, Simon, these are some amazing fights. There's some important fights. It's on Big Fox in America, so you're going to have a lot of eyeballs on it. And just a quick one on the top of the card. This is such an important fight for Chris Weidman. He needs a win. He needs a win so bad. It's not been going in his favor as of late. And he's still got himself here in a main event slot. Obviously, it's in Long Island, but he's coming off 3 back-to-back losses. Luke Rockhold, Yoel Romero, and recent Bellator signee Gegard Mousasi.
Yeah.
So let's see what happens. But yeah, I mean, just looking at it now, this could be the second most important fight of Chris Weidman's career outside of that first title fight with Anderson Silva.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you take a look at the form of the guys fighting as well, officially, Kelvin Gastelum has won 2 out of his last 3. But in terms of action in the cage, he's won 3 out of his last 3. His last fight was a dominant TKO win over Vitor Belfort. That fight result got overturned after Gastelum tested positive for marijuana. So he's lost out on that win on a technicality as far as I'm concerned. In the cage, no performance enhancers. He smashed Vitor Belfort. He also smashed Tim Kennedy. And he also ragdolled Johnny Hendricks. So, this for me is this is a man on a real charge, and a guy who I think could really become in 2018 a serious threat to the UFC's 185-pound title. I really do. I know he's short for the weight, but he's at his best weight class when he's fighting at 185. I've never seen him better than when he fought Tim Kennedy. And if he gets past Chris Weidman, then you really have got to start thinking about him as a legit top contender. And as you say, Weidman, it's almost win or go home time for Chris Weidman. He's been operating at this elite level, and all of a sudden the wheels have started to fall off. The pressure is really on, and he's fighting on home soil as well. This is a big, big, big fight for Chris Weidman. But the fight for me, aside from that main event, is the main card opener. Jimmy Rivera versus Thomas Almeida is made for network television. That fight is going to be an absolute banger. Rivera, heavy-handed, great wrestling, loves to stand and trade. Thomas Almeida is a psychopath with 4-ounce gloves on. So that is going to be a superb matchup. And I, for one, can't wait to see it. How do you see that one going, Sandu? Is it going to be Rivera, or is Almeida going to bring the violence and hand Rivera his first loss in almost forever?
Jesus Christ, Simon, that is flip a freaking coin. Really do. I mean, seriously, that is a flip a coin if you ever see one, because both are capable of winning. Both fighters only have one loss on their records. Oh, God. If you ask me to pick right now, I can't do it. I need to decompress, Simon. I need to decompress. I can't take on any more kind of fights right now and process them and kind of really think about them analytically. But yeah, you're right. On paper, that should be a smashing fight, and it could easily be the fight of the night.
Absolutely. For the record, and I'm putting it out there now, Jimmy Rivera wins this. He's on a 19-fight win streak. I think he's got the all-round game to deal with Thomas Almeida. What that means, of course, is that you should go down to bookmakers and put your mortgage on Thomas Almeida to win. So, because I've been doing terribly with fight picks. I've been doing absolutely terribly with fight picks. That, I think, is probably enough for this week. We'll wrap things up. Sandu is racking up the Wi-Fi charges up there in Glasgow Airport. So we'll put a lid on it for this week. We hope to have some news for you in the coming weeks about a few little changes we're going to make to the Brit Pack as we look to take things up a notch in the coming weeks and months. We're rapidly approaching show number 50, and the plan is, once we get past show number 50, to really start kicking things up a gear. We really appreciate everybody listening. You can follow us on Twitter at the BritPack MMA. We didn't do Q&A this week, but then send all your questions in. We will do questions on next week's show. Tweet them to us at the BritPack MMA. You can get in touch with Sandu during the week at Sandu MMA. You can get in touch with me at Simon Head. Check out the BritPack website while you're online, thebritpackmma.com. You'll find all of our back issues, all of our past shows, and the occasional blog as well. You can get us on Acast, on Apple Podcasts, on SoundCloud, and on Stitcher. That was the BritPack episode number 47. Hope you enjoyed that one. We'll be back to relive the action from the Nassau Coliseum as Weidman takes on Gastelum. But until then, enjoy the fights, and we'll speak to you next week.